Hi, it's Miss Lisa from the St. Paris Public Library. Today, for our doggy bag cooking class, we're going to be doing a dessert or a breakfast recipe that is going to be using up some different leftover fruits. And I have some berries that are left over, so I have some strawberries, and I have some raspberries, and I have some blueberries. Now, the blueberries technically aren't left over. I still have a full container because I haven't used those for the recipe I bought them for us, but I'm going to throw some in anyway. Mostly I'm using them for the strawberries. So in your cooking bag this week, you should have a variety of berries and some other ingredients. We're going to be using Bisquick as our muffin starter or our bread starter, depending on how you bake your berries today. But we're going to use Bisquick. Bisquick also offers a gluten-free option, so I do have a gluten-free buddy in my cooking class, and so I try to make the option available to him so that he can participate as well as easily as he can to modify his recipe. So you're going to need a bowl, about a medium-sized bowl. You need a measuring cup and a measuring spoon because we are going to measure some tablespoons out. I also have one of these measuring cups because we're going to use brown sugar and you have to pack it, and it's easier to pack in this than it is in a regular measuring cup. You're going to need a fork. The recipe called for a whisk, but I have one, but I use it for gravy and stuff. I don't usually use it when I'm baking muffins or whatever. So I'm just going to use a fork and a tablespoon that I can stir with, and then a muffin tin. Now the recipe calls for 8 muffins, so I only have a 6 muffin tin, or this one, so I'm going to use this one. It also calls for liners, cupcake liners, but they won't last long enough at my house to worry about using a cupcake liner. So what I do for my muffins is I just spray my muffins with some cooking spray inside each one. I'll do one. Do it to give good 2 squirts. Tilt my muffin tin to one side so that the oil or the liquid runs to one side. And then I take my finger and I go around the muffin tin really, really good all the way around. And then I do each one that way. That way, you get the oil all the way around. Now, if you don't have cooking spray and you just want to use regular oil, I don't recommend using olive oil because it does get a little bit hotter and it tends to make your muffins a little bit browner and chewier on the outside if you don't use the papers. But you can use like vegetable oil or canola oil. If olive oil is the only oil you use or have, then it's perfectly fine to use that. Okay, so we're going to get started with our baking. I'm going to move some things out of the way so we have some space to work, and then we're going to get started. Okay, the first thing I want to say is please wash your hands before you start any recipe, and take a clean cloth, and wipe down your work surface area. You can use soap and water to wash it off with a dish soap water cloth, or you can use some cleaning spray or something like that, but you do need to clean your work surface. Even though you're working in the bowl, you are setting things on the counter and then touching them and putting them in. So you want your workplace to be clean and as germ-free as possible. Okay, so we're going to start with our bowl, and we're going to put in our Bisquick mix. Now, I bought Bisquick for you guys, and I'm sorry if that's not something that you normally use, but we do use this at my house quite a bit because my husband is the breakfast maker. He uses Bisquick to make biscuits. And we're going to start with a cup and 1 1/4 cups of Bisquick. I'm just going to use my scooper to scoop it out. So we're going to start with 1 1/4 cups of Bisquick mix. I use these little clips for more than paper. I'm gonna close this up. Box. Okay, there's that. And our brown sugar. Now, there's a trick with brown sugar that my grandma taught me. She said she always left her brown sugar in the bag because it protected them from ants, she said. And sometimes when you open a bag of brown sugar and then you close it up and you put it back in the cabinet, it gets hard. It hardens up. Well, she always taught us to put a small piece of bread. Now, I can't tell you how long this piece of bread has been here. It does not mold. It never molds. And I usually put the heel of the bread in there because nobody eats it. And when you put that in there, it adds moisture. It draws the moisture from the sugar into the bread. This piece of bread is as hard as a rock, and it will draw it into the bread, and it takes the moisture out of your brown sugar, and it keeps your brown sugar soft. So don't ever throw away a bag of brown sugar because it's hard. Now you can put it in a bowl. If you want to put it in a bowl, you can put it in a bowl too, but I usually just leave mine in the bag. Okay, this calls for 1/2 cup of packed brown sugar. That means I'm going to scoop it in the bag and I'm going to mash it down so that it's packed in there. So if I just measured it without packing, it'd probably be about 1/4 of a cup because brown sugar gets a lot of air in it. So when you pack it, it gets hard like that. Okay, so you want 1/2 cup of packed brown sugar. And I'm going to break it up before I put it in there. There's a little dark piece. I'm going to take that out. Okay, put my bread back in my brown sugar because I don't want the brown sugar to get hard. My grandma would appreciate me teaching you that trick. All right, so we're going to mix together our flour, or our Bisquick mix, and our brown sugar. Now the recipe, this is where the recipe called for you to use a whisk. So I'm assuming they want you to make sure that you separate and you don't have any clumps of brown sugar, because brown sugar will clump up. So you want to use the fork and break any clumps of brown sugar that you might have, since we're not using a whisk today. If you want to use a whisk, you can, but I don't think my whisk will break it up very well. So we're going to mix this up really, really good and make sure we don't have any clumps in it. Okay, that looks pretty good. So it's just like that, and there's a few clumps left in there, so maybe I'll just mash them with my fingers. That feels pretty good. Just remember how important it is to wash your hands and then not touch your mouth or your face with your hands while you're cooking. Okay, so there are dry ingredients, a few of them. Okay, so let's see. Right. Okay, so there's the dry ingredients. So we're going to set this aside and we're going to cut our berries. Okay, this recipe calls for 1.5 cups of blueberries. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put some berries in my measuring cup so I know how many berries I'm going to use. Now, I want to use up most of my strawberries, all right? But I do want to put some blueberries in there. I was going to put some raspberries in there, but I think I'm going to keep those for something else. So today we're just going to use the strawberries and the blueberries. All right, so I'm going to pick out a couple of the strawberries, ones that are a little bit riper. You can use a butter knife, all right? So I'm going to cut my berry in half. It still has the stem on it, but you can cut it in half. Then I'm gonna roll it to the flat side, and then I'm gonna take my knife and stretch out the stem on the berry and flatten it out, and then I'm gonna cut it at an angle with my knife. That cuts the stem off, and sometimes when you have a berry that's not quite ripe, you get a white part around here. It's kind of tough, and so I don't want that in my berry, okay? I'm gonna look at the tip of my berry and see if there's a bunch of seeds there, which there are not. Sometimes you get berries that have like a big glop of seed at the end. So let me cut this other one. Pull your stem down, slice it at an angle, and check the tip for a big bunch of seeds. If there is a bunch of seeds, if you have like a tip that has a bunch of seeds, just cut that little tip off. Don't waste too much of your berries because you really can use pretty much all of it. So cut your berries in half, flip them to the flat side, use the knife to flatten out your stem, then cut it at an angle. Check your tip. Oh, these are really good berries. They're very ripe. I'm gonna try to make sure your berries are ripe too. All right, I'm gonna do one more because they're gonna be pretty small. Use this one. And flatten out my stem. Now you can use any kind of fruit with these. You can substitute any kind of fruit. Just remember that the riper the fruit, the more liquid it has. So you're adding not just fruit to your recipe, but liquid. So if you use a juicy liquidy fruit, because like I have some pineapple in my refrigerator that I could add to this recipe if I wanted to, but I'm not going to do that today, but it would add a little bit more liquid. So when we're mixing it together, we're going to kind of pay attention to how much liquid is, how thin the batter is once we mix the fruit in, to make sure that it's not too thin. All right, so we have now removed the stems from our strawberries, so we're just going to cut them. I don't want a big chunk of strawberry in mine. I want like little pieces. So we're going to cut it in half again, and then cut that in half, and then we're just going to dice it. That means it's going to be small pieces, about that big. Okay, so you're going to do that to all of the strawberries. Okay, I've diced up all my strawberries, so I'm going to put them in my measuring cup because remember, we're going to use, the recipe calls for 1.5 cups of fruit. So we're going to put them in there. Now, I don't know about you, but my strawberries were very juicy. It's going to be hard not to eat any of those before I put this blueberries in. Okay, so now I'm going to fill the rest of the cup up with blueberries to make my 1.5 cups. Now, your blueberries, when they come in these containers, I don't know if you know this or not, but you can actually wash your blueberries in this container. When I bring fruit home from the store, that's the first thing that I do. Because sometimes when you buy fruit in these containers, they have holes in them. And things can go through those holes, like spiders and things. And so I don't like to bring those into my house. So you can either leave the lid shut and run water over the top through the holes, and it will drain out through the bottom. You can rinse it, you can jiggle it. You can actually fill your sink full of water, set the container in there, let it soak for a few minutes. Always use cold water, by the way, and then let it sit in there for a few minutes, jiggle it around so it moves stuff and takes stems and different things out of the container, and then just lift it up out of the water. Then sometimes I open the lid and I will spray the top just to clean everything out. Then I will let it sit in my dish drainer just for a little while to drain the water off. Sometimes I don't leave them in these containers depending on what kind of fruit they are, but most of the time I do. But if I wash them, I usually drain them in this container. So I just wanted to tell you, it's like a colander that you can rinse your fruit in. Okay, so I'm going to pick out a handful of blueberries, and I want to look at them closely because I want to make sure that they don't have stems on them. I want to leave them whole because they cook that way, and when you bite into them, they're just like yummy. They're just like a blueberry yummy thing in your mouth. So we're gonna pick through the berries. Make sure you check every one for a stem because they get in there. So to check your blueberries, fill your cup the rest of the way up to 1.5 cups of fruit. Okay, I got excited and overfilled my cup. So I have 1.5 cups of strawberries and blueberries ready to go in. I did pull out a couple of blueberries that were bad. This one was kind of mashed and it had a stem on it, and this one was mashed too. And I noticed that I had one right here that has a little bit of mold on it, so I took it out too because we don't want to leave that in there. Now your blueberries need to be washed before you use them, so make sure that you rinse them really well. Don't wash them with soap. Sometimes I'd wash some of my fruit with soap, but not blueberries, not the fruit. Bananas and melons, I always wash them with a little bit of dish soap and water on the outside. Sometimes you get some bacteria on the outside of those that cause you intestinal problems. So I try to make sure that I wash that kind of fruit, any fruit that has a skin on it that I might cut through into the inside of the fruit. So you have 1.5 cups of blueberries and the strawberries. And now I'm gonna clean up my space a little bit and move to the next step. Okay, I'm sorry, but I'm gonna mix this in a second bowl. The recipe calls for the wet ingredients to be combined together in a separate bowl and mixed together and then added to the dry ingredients. Normally, if I was cooking, I would just take my dry ingredients, make a well or a hole in the center of my mixed dry ingredients, put all my wet ingredients, and then mix it together. But since the recipe called for you to do it separately, I'm going to do it separately also for this recipe. So it has us adding our milk, butter, vanilla, and egg into a separate bowl. We're going to use fat-free milk because that's what we use at my house. So that's what we're using today. It calls for 6 tablespoons of fat-free milk. Always use a measuring spoon when you're cooking or baking, unless you have a recipe that you have perfected and you like it and you've added different ingredients to it. This recipe, I would probably, look, I haven't been counting. Let's start that again. Hold on a minute. Let me pour that back in there. Let me stop talking and count these out. That way I get the right amount. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There we go. See, even I make mistakes a lot. Okay, so 6 tablespoons of milk, 3 tablespoons of butter melted. Now, we don't use solid butter at our house because that is saturated. We eat, okay. Butter, 3 tablespoons of melted butter. So we don't use liquid or solid butter at my house. Well, I do, but my husband doesn't. And since he's probably going to be the one to eat most of these muffins, I try to make this recipe for him so he can eat it because he eats a low saturated fat diet. This liquid butter is lower in saturated fat. It actually has 0 saturation in it. Saturation, what it does, it adds an ingredient that hardens, it adds fat to your butter so that it hardens. The liquid butter takes the fat out so it stays liquefied all the time. So we use this, and this is what I put in your doggy bag so that you could try this butter and see how you like it. It's also has a spray top. So when he gets ready to eat toast or anything like that that needs butter spread on it, he just sprays it. You just spray it on there. Instead of spreading it on there, you just spray it on there. Okay, so this calls for 3 tablespoons. 1, 2, 3. I counted that time, so I couldn't make a mistake because I can't take that out. Okay, that's 3 tablespoons of the melted butter. Okay, if you don't want to use this, it's totally fine. If you want to use regular butter and you just melt it, you need 3 tablespoons. All right, so there's the melted butter. We need vanilla and an egg. So we need 2 teaspoons of vanilla. I'm happy to hear that. I love vanilla flavoring. If I bake stuff, I like to put lots of vanilla and lots of cinnamon in everything. 2. And then you want 1 egg. 1 egg. And just put that right in there. Set that right there. Okay, now if you have a whisk, this is when I would use a whisk because you have an egg, or a fork. Poke a hole in your yolk and then tilt your bowl slightly to the side so that your liquid comes to the side, and then very carefully just go this way with your fork, just like you're making scrambled eggs, because you want to mix up that egg really good in there. Okay, you don't need it to be frothy, but you just need to mix the egg in there really well. All right, so now this is when it tells us to make a well. So we're gonna take, I'm just gonna use this fork because I'm gonna use it to mix with, and push your dry ingredients to the sides. Make a hole in the middle. It doesn't have to go all the way down to the bowl, but you want it to have like a little dip in the middle. Then you're gonna pour your ingredients. Stir around, make sure I get everything off the sides. Pour your ingredients into the center. Right. Then we're going to mix it together. Slowly add a little bit of liquid at a time from the edges, stirring it around until you mix your batter in together, so you get it all mixed up together. Okay, you want your batter to be very smooth and creamy. That looks good. It even tastes good. It has an egg in it, so I won't taste it because I don't like to eat raw eggs. Some of you guys do eat raw eggs, like if you eat raw cookie dough, but I don't eat raw eggs. All right, so we have our batter all mixed up together. Now we're gonna fold in our fruit. So I'm going to use a spoon for this. You can also use a spatula, okay, or a spoon, either one. I'm going to use a spoon when I put them into my greased muffin tins. So either one, it doesn't matter. I'm going to get it dirty anyway. So I'm just going to pour my fruit in, and I'm going to put all of it in at the same time. Make sure you get every delicious piece. And then I think I am going to use my spatula, but you can use a spoon if you want to. Folding means you go down to the bottom and pull up and fold over. You're folding it over in there. You want to be gentle with your blueberries because you don't want to smash them in there. Strawberries, doesn't really matter a whole lot, but you don't want to mash them a whole bunch and release all that juice into the batter because it will be runny. This way the fruit stays together so that when it cooks in there and you bite into it, you have that delicious fruit in there. So I'm just going to scrape around the side and fold it over, around the side and fold it over. And you just keep doing this until you mix your fruit in Oh, that looks delicious. If the batter was white, it would be very patriotic for 4th of July, but my batter's yellow. So, but it's okay. It'll still be delicious. All right, that's about it. I'm not gonna I don't wanna mix it too much, just enough so that when I'm spooning it out, I have plenty of fruit in every delicious muffin. Okay, so the next step is to grease or put your liners in your muffin tins. It's totally up to you. I just prefer not to use the cupcake liners unless I'm making something that I'm going to take outside from my house. If I'm making them at my house, I just don't use the liners and I grease the tin because they don't last very long here. And I just put them, I'll probably wash this bowl and I'll put the cooled muffins in this bowl and put the lid on it and leave it on the counter or put it in the fridge after a day or so if there's even any left. So I'm gonna go ahead and spray and finish oiling my muffin tin. All right, so my muffin tin is all oiled. Now listen, if you don't have a muffin tin and you want to make this into a cake or a bread, you could do that. You could use a smaller container, or I'm sorry, a smaller baking dish to put these in. Probably as long as it's about the same thickness as your muffins, it should be okay to bake. You might have to bake it a little bit longer, but you could keep an eye on it and make sure that it doesn't over bake. But we're gonna make ours in muffin tins today. That looks so good. All right, so I'm just gonna use this spoon and I'm gonna dish it out. I'm gonna try not to get any on the top of my muffin pan because man, I hate cleaning that thing. All right, look, I dropped it right on there. That has a lot of fruit in it. Okay, they're about three quarters of the way full. I'm gonna make mine about half full. I don't want my muffins to be too big. They are loaded with fruit. These are gonna be delicious. So go ahead and fill your muffin tins about halfway full. Most muffins or cupcakes are 3/4 of the way full, but I'm not really sure how much these will raise. So I suggest you fill them about half full. Make sure you pay attention to the outside of your bowl because sometimes you'll get a lot of batter on the edges of your bowl because all the fruit will sink to the middle. And just scrape your bowl, get that extra batter in there, and fold it around every so often when you're scooping your batter out. That way you make sure you don't have one of the muffins ends up being mostly batter and not much fruit. As you can see, moving into number 7, I think this is gonna make pretty close to 8. If I fill them 3/4 of the way full, it would have made 8, but since I didn't, it made me an extra one, so I'm gonna have 9. This one has a lot of batter. All right. So it ended up making 9 cupcakes, only because I didn't fill them as full as what they normally would be. I just prefer to make them a little bit smaller because we don't need to eat that big a muffin at our house. And you might not want your kids to eat muffins that are quite that big. Okay, these last 2 are not gonna have as much fruit in them. All right, I'll take a couple little blueberries out of this one. Spread the wealth. There's some big blueberries in there. This one has some too. Take an extra. All right, so we're gonna spread that out. Your oven should be preheated to 375, which I should have told you to do that in the beginning if I didn't, because I can't remember. So we're gonna bake these in a 375-degree oven for 20 minutes, and then you have to let them stand for about 10 minutes before you take them out of the pan. So after 20 minutes, we are going to check and see how done they are and go from there. I'm going to try to wipe all this off the top so I don't have a hard time cooking or cleaning it when I'm done. So we're going to bake our muffins and see how they turn out. Okay, our muffins have baked for 20 minutes, and now the recipe says to let them sit in the pan for at least 10 minutes to cool. I'm going to use a fork, and very carefully, because this is a non-stick pan, and I'm just going to go around the edges of my muffin because I did not use papers, and I'm just going to loosen up the muffins around the edge. If you look at your muffins, you're going to notice how delicious they look. Some of the blueberries that were close to the tops or around the edges literally exploded when they got cooked, when they started to cook. So these, and they smell so good. I expect to see my husband coming downstairs any minute now because I'm pretty sure he can smell these up there. So we're going to let these sit in the pan for about 10 minutes, but I loosened them so that they won't get stick in the pan too bad. So we're going to wait about 10 minutes and take them out of the pan. All right, the muffins have been sitting for about 10 minutes, so we're going to gently pull them out. And if you look at the bottoms of them, they're nice and crusty and delicious. I'm going to set them on the tops. I have a cooling rack that I'm going to put mine on, but if you don't have one of those, you can just put it on the countertop. Let me pop these a little bit here. Where the berries are on the bottom, they're kind of sticking on the bottom. They do have a lot of berries in them. Ooh, that one popped open. There we go. Maybe I use my fork. I'll make sure we get all the muffins out. I'm probably going to put these in the refrigerator after they cool off for storage, since they do have the fruit in them. We don't want them to sit out on the counter and spoil after all of our hard work. If they last more than a day at your house, these will last a little bit longer because there's so many. But as you can see, they're pretty big muffins. So, all right, there we go. And for the most part, they didn't stick too bad in the pan, just really where the fruit was in the bottom. So you're just gonna have to take your time and take them out of the pan. But if you let them cool, loosen them and then let them cool. If you use the cupcake liners, you can just leave them sit. You won't need to loosen anything until you get ready to take them out. You'll have to loosen around the top. So pretty much you can just put them on a plate and eat them. I'm just gonna eat one because it's pretty big. Let's cut it open and see what it looks like on the inside. Oh, that looks delicious. Oh, look at all those blueberries in there. Look at that. That looks really good. I don't think I'm even gonna put any butter on that. I think I'm just gonna eat it just like it is. So I hope you like this recipe with the leftover fruit. It didn't take a whole lot. As you saw, we only used 4 strawberries and a little bit of blueberries. So if you have just a little bit of fruit left, you can make these probably with just about any kind of fruit. So join us next week for another cooking class. Delicious.